pleasure and honor to introduce Gwendolyn Hallsmith. I hope Gwen is fine.
Yes.
Although we didn't meet each other back then, Gwen and I discovered after she got involved in AFJM a few years ago that we were in each other's presence back in 2004 when she and I both attended the E.F. Schumacher Society's conference on local currencies in the 21st century, which happened actually 4 months before the first AMI conference, and which I later learned Zarlenga himself considered presenting it at that conference. And I think that conference was pivotal for both Gwen and me, in part because we met monetary scholars and activists, among them Bernard Lietaer and Margaret Kennedy from Germany. And while I pursued ongoing communication with Kennedy, who was the author of Local Currencies in the 21st Century, I think that came out in English in 95. It was published already in the 80s. And then in 2012, she published Occupy Money. And she also founded Moneta, which is a local currency network in Germany, mostly Europe, that maybe Gwen will tell us some about in her talk. But Gwen not only pursued ongoing communication with Bernard Lietaer, she ended up co-authoring a book with him in 2011 that was called Creating Wealth and Growing Local Economies with Local Currencies. So I have an earlier book by Lietaer, and I have borrowed from the library Gwen's book and read parts of it, not cover to cover. But not only that book, Gwen has authored 5 other books and many articles, podcasts, and videos on sustainable community and economic development that are based largely on systems thinking and global ethics. She has worked with communities all over the world to foster caring communities, local economies, good governance, efficient infrastructure and services, and healthy ecosystems. Unlike most of us, I think, in this room and involved in monetary reform work, Gwen's work has included work in government at the local, regional, and state levels, and on projects funded by bilateral and multilateral donors at the international level. The latter we hope to learn from her on, and the former is super important for our work for the public good. She is executive director of the Global Community Initiatives, a nonprofit organization she founded in 2002 with members of the Balaton Group, which included, whoops, wrong book there, included authors of The Limits of Growth, from whom she really, I think, at least she said, first learned applied systems thinking. And the 30-year update of this book, which I'm holding, it just came out before that 2004 Local Currencies Conference that we were at, and it was featured there. That's where I got my copy of it. She has also founded the Vermonters for a New Economy to work on economic solutions at the state level. She founded an eco-village, which Kennedy lived in one in Germany I visited, and private community land trust in Vermont. And she and her husband, Michael Taub, sing in the folk duo called The New Economistas, a song of which Stephen already played for us at this conference. Maybe we'll hear one more at the end. And the two of them sang live at AFJM's May Day for Money gathering in Chicago last May, which they were present at, participated in, and Gwen actually also presented at that. Finally, like Bruce Wall, we just heard from, Gwen is a lifelong learner with rich academic experience too. Gwen has a master's degree in public policy from Brown University. She did additional graduate work at the University of British Columbia and Andover Newton Divinity School, similar maybe to Bruce and the other Bruce. And myself, I did some work at a divinity school. Gwen is currently a doctoral candidate at Concordia University in Montreal studying geography, urban and environmental studies with a focus on land reparations and indigenous land tenure. From her wealth of experience, both practical and theoretical, Gwen will present to us today I think the title originally at least is History of Complementary Currencies in the United States. Congratulations, Gwen, thank you for your work and for sharing your spirit and your wealth of knowledge with us today. So the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Lucille. Wow, what an introduction. And it's interesting because during the presentation before last, we got talking a lot about definitions. And it was actually Steve that assigned me this topic. He says, well, I'd really like you to present at AMI. And what about the history of complementary currencies in the US? And I thought, okay, I mean, I knew the superficial history before like 1930 about colonial script and all of that, but I didn't really know the details. So I thought it was an interesting assignment. I just note that there's a difference between complementary currencies and complimenting somebody on their appearance or something. And so definitions, what is a complementary currency? I'm kind of an interactive speaker, so I'd be curious if any of you have a definition for it. What is it? What is complementary currency?
Yeah.
It's not paying compliments to money. It's actually,
it's not competing with the dominant currency.
see, that's an interesting thing. When I went and looked it up, tried to find what the standard definition was, I found that definition. And in some ways it's defined by what it's not, right?
Yeah. Right.
The definitions say, well, it's a currency that circulates, but it's not really legal tender. So, but that doesn't tell you what it is. So I'm venturing my own definition right now. You are the first to hear it of what complementary currency actually is. And as you can see from the slide, it's a monetary innovation designed to fill a gap where other forms of money and currency have been inadequate. Now, if you take this definition of complementary currencies, which is something I've actually experienced, so I agree with the definition since I made it up, and you look at US history, it gives you a very interesting perspective on the evolution of money in the United States. And so some of this stuff I've just learned. I'm not an academic, but I did find some interesting books on it. But first, I just have to touch on why is the monetary system inadequate? Now, I'm sure there's been a lot of talk at the conference about that. But in my work, looking at money as a system with the lens of system dynamics, I've found 5 system conditions that lead our monetary system to being the monster that it is, which means it is driving the growth imperative and it's driving human impoverishment and biodiversity loss. All big problems that we're struggling to face that you can trace right back to the monetary system a lot of the time. And these 5 system conditions, I call them, are that it's privately owned, debt-based, positive interest, it's a monoculture, and it's a monopoly. All of these conditions produce an emergent property of the monetary system behaving as it does. And because it's an emergent property, it's controversial. I've been talking to economists for years now about, does the monetary system drive the growth imperative? And the closest that the apologist economists have come to refuting that has been to construct this model of a steady state economy and say, well, interest can still exist there, so it can't be doing that. And they completely ignore, the facts of the world outside themselves. But we know that about economists. They make up theories to go with their ideas rather than what is actually happening in the world. If we change these 5 system conditions, so privately owned, it's got to be publicly owned, debt-based, it's got to be issued without debt, without interest, and we need to allow more forms of money than we do now. It is a monoculture. And like in agriculture, a monoculture, when something goes wrong, like the banks make too many loans that people can't pay back, the whole system comes crashing down around their ears. And so I argue that the monoculture aspect of money is a very important one that we can't look away from. And it's a monopoly. The government gives the banks the monopoly on producing our legal tender. So those 5 system conditions are something we need to look at about what makes it inadequate. The other thing, of course, that's a side effect of our money system is wealth concentration. And here's a little graphic about how 74% of our wealth in the United States is controlled by very few people, And the vast majority of people in the country are poor. I had another chart at one point that showed that about 95% of the population in the United States, if they have a problem with their car and they have a $600 repair they need to make, that person is going to be out of work if they need their car for work because they can't come up with that amount of extra money. And meanwhile, you have these billionaires that are shooting themselves to the moon because they have too much of it. Now, Bernard introduced me to this idea of how to look for complementary currency possibilities. And that was, you've got to link unmet needs with underutilized resources. So what are the unmet needs that humanity has right now? Well, billions of people lack access to basic water and sanitation, live in poverty, and die young. We need trillions of dollars to solve that problem. We're reaching global debt and investment limits. And this topic is something I would take another dissertation to write, but I believe it's true. And privatization can't be the way forward. Privatization has been what's been going on. It's driven, in fact, by the monetary system. And that book Lucille mentioned, Creating Wealth, does have system dynamic diagrams in it that shows how, if you're interested in that. But there's been a lot of studies done now on how a lot of places that thought they could privatize their water system are now they're going back to being public because the private water system did not operate as promised by neoliberal economics. Also, income inequality, the vast income inequality we have right now in the States makes higher taxes and fees on services unenforceable and increasingly unjust. So that's a big problem for privatization advocates. Now, what are the unmet needs we have for nature right now? Climate change is already causing mass migration, loss of food supply, and biodiversity. If you live anywhere in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, right now, Tennessee, you know that climate change is real. They just had a storm that I have never seen like one before. 45 inches of rain south of Asheville, North Carolina. Vermont was devastated by 6 inches. This is orders of magnitude worse. Whole towns have been wiped off the map if you're not paying attention to the news. And this was just this week. Trillions of dollars are needed again to reduce emissions, to add sequestration, to change manufacturing and mitigate the inevitable impacts. We have so far even failed to slow the rate of increase of greenhouse gas emissions. We are at total policy failure. We're calling for this, magic number of 350. And I disagreed with Bill McKibben on that, because if we wanted to maintain our ice caps, we needed to keep it below 300 parts per million, not 350 parts per million. But we're past that now. We're into the era where we're going to have climate chaos, and that isn't good for any of us. All of this is going to cost an enormous amount of money to fix, and the monetary system itself is driving this process, because we are living in an economy that has to grow, that has to extract from the human and natural environment. And in doing so, it is destroying our life support systems on Earth. That's a huge problem. Now, what are some underutilized assets out there? So when Bernard talks about we match unmet needs with underutilized assets, and that's how you create the currency. Well, wealthy individuals and corporations own millions of homes, and they're buying more of them, and many of them are sitting empty while homeless people are sleeping on the streets and in cheap hotels. Nobody needs 6 homes. And corporations owning homes is a bad idea. It's creating a new feudalism. My son was looking into going into college down in Georgia, and I was looking for a rental for him, or even a place he could buy, to live while he was going to graduate school. There was nothing for sale. The corporations around that university had bought all the housing, literally all the housing. You could rent it for, $4,000 a month, but you couldn't. There was no homes for sale. Really horrible. Public infrastructure, like transit, also needs to work all the time, even when people aren't riding the bus or taking the train. So empty seats on public transit are underutilized assets. And we've seen how in Curitiba, Brazil, the mayor of Curitiba mobilized that underutilized asset to get trash out of the favelas. He traded the trash for bus tickets and for food, because the trash trucks couldn't get into the narrow streets in the favelas in Brazil. So he said, well, bring your trash to these collection places and you'll get bus tickets. Brilliant. That is a complementary currency. that matched an underutilized asset with an unmet need. Empty seats or low attendance in sports stadiums, at sporting events, in public pools, all these places that we have the capacity and we charge admission for, but, it's never full. Those can be mobilized. And we did actually, where I used to work in Montpelier, Vermont, mobilize some of that for a currency. Also, food that's wasted when it can't be sold for profit at a supermarket. That's an underutilized asset. When a lot of people are going hungry, France has passed a law making it illegal to throw that food out. So we could do other things as well to help mobilize it to be currency. Now, this is sort of a framework that I developed for thinking about these complementary currencies. And when we're looking at the details of the history, it's good to keep this in mind. There are social purpose currencies, and these are currencies that work on poverty eradication, health and education, elder care, community services, and greenhouse gas reductions. Oops, sorry. And then there's commercial purpose currencies, and those are things that maybe produce business loyalty or commercial barter or, different fiat currencies. The fiat currencies that have been out there are largely like Ithaca Hours and all of that to try and keep a lot of the money in the local community. So one of the things I discovered in my research for Steve's topic is that money in the United States actually started as a complementary currency. If you take my definition saying that it's a monetary innovation that emerges or comes into being when existing forms of money are inadequate. Now, money was inadequate. We've heard that already today in the early days because coins were short. I actually have written a lot about this era. I wrote a novel because I was amazed that people got on ships with maybe a couple trunk loads of stuff, hopefully with a saw and some hammer and nails, because they were landing somewhere where there wasn't any Home Depots to help you build your house. You had to go out and actually build your house, clear the land, start growing crops. And, the book I've written was about people that were leaving England in September, right, to try and get to the New World in time to grow things without realizing that where they were going to land was going to be cold winter and there was not going to be any possibility of growing anything for some time. But you had all these settlers coming over and they had to send all those coins back to England for the consumer goods they wanted, because in the colonies, they didn't have stores, they didn't have products. And so they had to send all the money that they made and all the goods that they made back to the mainland to get those consumer goods. Now, indigenous people traded with wampum. Wampum, if you don't know, is pieces cut from these clamshells, and they particularly value the purple bits. And this is a very important means of exchange in indigenous communities. Although they didn't look at it as money like we do, they gifted things back and forth, which was an important thing. Now, there was also no mint over here until the British Civil War, where Massachusetts managed, I think it was Massachusetts or Virginia, somebody managed to start minting coins, and the British didn't really notice until after the Civil War was over. So they did have these minted coins from the colonies. They were forced to close that down, though, once the king woke up to the fact that the colonies were doing something he didn't want them to. Now, one of the books I read to prepare for this, I recommend to all of you because it is, as you can see, published last year. It's called Easy Money, American Puritans and the Invention of Modern Currency by the University of Chicago Press. This book goes into detail about the differences between the colonies and really centered the creation of what people have been calling colonial scrip in Massachusetts more than the others. And there's lots of reasons for that they describe in the book, including actually that the Massachusetts settlers were really more middle class. They were these folks that were coming over and trying to settle and create communities, whereas in Virginia, it was really more like a slave and owner. It's a much more feudal model. And so, in Massachusetts, they established a university. So you did have these highly educated people, trying to sort out how to run an economy. And that's an important factor, apparently. Now, there were a lot of colonial currency experiments. When we talk about colonial scrip, we're not talking about one thing, actually. There were a lot of things that could be called that and were used both before 1690, which was sort of a bellwether moment, and after. They made wampum legal tender during this period of time. Grain and tobacco were considered legal tender during this period of time. You could pay your taxes with those exchange means, right, or means of exchange. Taxes were also paid in butter, cheese, hens, beef, and pork. So, you know, this idea of legal tender and well, this currency that we have is not that, you know, is also a very flexible idea. And it certainly was flexible back in the colonial days. They also had some copper coins that they would circulate to try and make enough money for the economy to run. They'd trade cows. They literally cut them up and put them into barrels. Beads, fur, and bullets and lead were considered currency. So lots of experiments. Every time, you know, something went wrong, they were scrambling to find other ways to run their economy. Like during the British Civil War, they had a real depression over here because the kind of arrangements that were going back and forth before the Civil War started changed radically, and they just had no money, no new people, nothing coming over to the US. Now, one of the innovations that occurred during that period of time was called the bills of exchange. And these were basically the kind of thing that we heard Macmillan talking about, where the stuff was going on the balance sheets more, and these bills just sort of matched the merchant up with a balance sheet that needed to be credited. And the Bank of Amsterdam was responsible for innovating this. And the traders that were in Boston and the New World were very familiar with this bill of exchange, which is a form of paper currency. These are some examples of them. British law allowed assigning debts, and that's what these essentially were. They're saying they owe me money and you owe them money, so you're going to pay me the money I owe you, right? It's just a way of transferring a debt for your own benefit, and that person then can go and collect it from the original creditor. So this was a form of mutual credit that was based largely on commodities, because these bills of exchange were mostly used when people were trading things overseas. But they were used sometimes as a form of payment. Like France sent bills of exchange for local merchants with the soldiers to fight one of the wars in Canada in 1863 and 1864. So they could be used for payment for individuals. Largely, they were between traders. Another thing I found in this research was that, in fact, colonial scrip wasn't the first kind of paper money. The first paper money in circulation was French card money up here in Canada, where I live. The first paper money in circulation around 1683 to 1684 was brought to us by Jacques de Mille, who was an autocratic intendant of colonial Canada. He cut playing cards and quarters and put the denominations on the back and a promise that when the next ship came with some coins, because they were very low on coins, a lot of this is about shortage of coins, they would be able to trade those cards for the coins. This is how soldiers, again, were paid when coins ran out and the ships were late. Another soldier-related form of paper money were these debentures, which are basically mini loans to the soldiers. You know, the bearer of this is allowed to come to the army office and get $4 in cash. So they'd pay these soldier debentures, and then they'd collect later for the money they were owed. Now, the 1690 moment is, I believe, what Ben Franklin might have been talking about when he was talking about colonial scrip, because these were quite different than the bills of exchange and the card money. They were individualized tax anticipation notes. Basically, it was based on this new understanding that was budding in Massachusetts, that the fact that the Massachusetts government would accept these things as payment for taxes meant that you could develop a full circuit of currency with these bills of credit. And so these were issued as a way of keeping the economy running, and then they could be turned in for taxes. The interesting thing about all of these forms, to me, as a pacifist and former pastor, is war was the father of paper money. Necessity was the mother. these forms of paper money, including, by the way, greenbacks, right, came into existence largely because governments didn't have the money to pay their soldiers, and they needed to find a way to pay the people that were over there, you know, burning villages, women and children, and murdering people. So another book I found, or article, I think it's an article, The Blood That Nourishes the Body Politic, The Origins of Paper Money in Early America. She says, for colonial publicists writing in the first half of the 18th century, paper money was thus not only the sinews of war and trade, but also the blood that nourished the provincial political body, which, if diminished, need to be brought back. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. There probably were examples of currencies between the fact when the United States was founded in 1907, but the next example I found of scrip was during the Panic of 1907, which of course is what led to the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. And you can see here, both San Francisco and Chicago had a clearinghouse association that issued this scrip, and it allowed the economy to keep functioning when there was very little money to be found. And the banks had lost a lot of the faith of the public, and on and on. Wooden nickels was another type of thing that would circulate. We hear jokes about these and picture round wooden things, but there was this kind of unique form of wooden nickels that were actually more like currency than like a little token, right? They would allow people to exchange them for relatively small amounts of money, but you know, small amounts of money go a long way back then. Of course, depression scrip is something that we know a lot, we hear a lot more about. I was actually kind of surprised to find that there had been a form of scrip in 1907, and it wasn't just in the Depression. And again, you see these clearinghouse associations, not exactly directly government issue, but, you know, the government accepted them. They circulated in the local economy. And I particularly liked this note down here in the lower right-hand corner. It's the back of the city of Creede, Colorado, which is where I'm from originally. And look at the pretty dog they have on that. I mean, they really spent some time developing these forms of scrip, and you can tell that they were important for the local economy. Cities themselves issued the scrip along the same lines as colonial scrip, where they'd accept them back for taxes. Here's a few examples of those. Interesting with the Depression era script, and we'll look at this next, is that there were these sort of green stamp forms that would happen, and you were supposed to go around and get like 54 in this case, and there's a few others that have a little lower amount. You're supposed to have all those transactions that you've made with that note stamped on the back, and then you, after 54 times through the local economy, you could collect the dollar back. There's a very good article by Thomas Greco, New Money for Healthy Communities, where he talks about these Caslow recovery certificates were issued by this corporation or company. $1 million of it was issued, little of it was redeemed. He paid his employees with it as a way to pay them during the Depression, but he refused to accept it himself. So they eventually were out. I think if you're going to issue this sort of thing, and what he did as a business was a newspaper and advertising business, so he could have accepted it for ads. I always thought that that was a great way in a local community to close those circles, because you're always trying to close those circles when you're developing a local currency. And the newspapers and the city and some other things that businesses always want to spend their money on are really good people to target first if you're going to try and introduce it. Here's another one that's modeled after those Caslow certificates in Reading, Berks County. Again, you were supposed to get the stamps on the back. Stamp scrip note, it's called, right, with a $1 value. Panther Valley certificates, this was another example of that kind of scrip with the stamps on the back. And then Carmel by the Sea, another one. There's a really interesting website that has a map of the country. And I think it was on that, it's on that slide about Greco that has all the different kinds of script. I've just pulled a few of them out. Really fascinating. Larkin merchandise bonds. Here's another one that Greco talks about. $36,000 of these bonds, it was a furniture company, I think, resulted in $250,000 in sales. So this is one of those loyalty currencies. Basically, if you look at my typology of complementary currencies at the beginning, this company paid it to its employees, but because they accepted it for the kinds of merchandise they were selling, it was enormously successful for them. And then straight out business script. This is the company store, right? That is issuing business script, and they're accepting it for payment in their local businesses. Bunch of different kinds here, the Los Angeles Cooperative Creamery, the Stork System of Savings, which is a lumberman's bank in Washington, the Dallas Texans merchandise script by the Sanger brothers. Here we have the Borger Daily Herald. So here's a paper that's issuing the script and accepting it back. Now, local fiat currencies, I'm moving up in time a little faster here, are issued by some type of central authority. Their value is based on the issuer's guarantee. And they also, we found they need to be managed to control inflation. One of the first ones of the modern or more recent local fiat currencies, of course, was the Ithaca Hour. This was ran from 1991 to 2014. Sadly, Paul Glover, the founder of Ithaca Hour, had a stroke a few years ago. I don't know whether he's even still alive yet, but brilliant man. And the Ithaca Hour was based on the idea that 1 hour should be worth at least $10. And this, back in 1991, that was a lot, a lot more than it is today. I don't think we would say that today. It would be more like half an hour or a quarter of an hour. But they had these divisions. The denominations were in like 1/10 of an hour. That would have been worth like 1/10 of an Ithaca Hour. They issued them into existence. They circulated in the local economy, and a study that was done in Ithaca on the economic impact of this currency was that it added several $100,000 a year to the local economy. It was enormously acceptable, successful while it was working. I can't say the same about all of these fiat currencies. I don't recommend you start them, because actually managing the notes consumes so much of your time that doing other things that are needed or other things that you'd even want to do with a local currency is just prohibitive when you're running on volunteer time and volunteer effort. But there's a lot of them out there. Burlington bread, another since defunct currency that I actually helped reissue back in 2004. But again, managing the notes is the hardest part. Now, countries with complementary currency systems are pictured here. There's probably more now. This slide is a little bit dated, but you can see they're all over the world. And the growth in complementary currencies is dramatic, especially since the early 80s, all over the world. And when you see, here's a systems idea, when you see an exponential growth curve like this, there's a reinforcing system behind it. And I believe that the reinforcing system behind this is that they actually do solve problems of not having enough money in the sectors of the economy that need it. Now let's going into a little more detail about social purpose currencies. They're introduced to solve a social problem. Sometimes they can be exchanged for money, so that doesn't make it completely complementary. And many of them provide supplemental income to low-income people without being taxable income in the United States. We're still in the United States here, and the United States likes to tax barter. So if you start a barter system in the United States and you put it online and you're trading stuff, you can expect a knock on your door from the IRS that's going to want to have you pay taxes on those barter items. So whereas a let system works pretty well in Canada and other places, we have to think about that harder in the United States. But one thing that is absolutely a good way to both get the mentality about complementary currencies started in your community and to deal with some of the low-income problems are time banks. Time banks were first established by a man named Edgar Kahn, who sadly died a couple years ago. And these are where people are trading time instead of money. And the basic principles of time banks are that everybody's time is worth the same. So it doesn't matter if you're a babysitter or a highly trained electrician An hour is an hour is an hour. Electricians need babysitters. So it isn't necessarily something that's going to completely replace the monetary system, but it does help ameliorate its negative impacts. All of these types of services, we traded in time banks. I established one in Montpelier, Vermont, with still going. This is now 12 years later without my help, called the Onion River Exchange. Another thing we did in Montpelier was modeled after a Japanese complementary currency called the Japanese furai kippu. Basically, that translates into caring relationship tickets. So if you live in Osaka and your parents live in Tokyo, you can exchange with that person in Tokyo these tickets when you go to care for an elderly person near you in Osaka. This was run through the unions and through a foundation, and it was enormously successful in helping elderly people get the services that they need. So we started what we called a care bank out of the Time Bank in central Vermont, where we offered services to elderly through the Time Bank. The differences between a care bank and a time bank were that when you join the care bank, that you join with the expectation that you would give like 4 hours a month to assignments that you might be given to the elderly. Whereas mostly time banks work a little like a marketplace where you post your offers and needs online and you trade as you will. You can do it a lot, you can do it a little, it doesn't matter. But when you join the care bank, we did expect you to dedicate some of your time to elder care and to be willing to accept assignments on it. And these are all the kinds of services that we offered through the care bank. Interestingly enough, right around the time I was working on the care bank, my elderly father came to live with me and he got involved. And he just had the most wonderful time with this woman named Polly. They became like best friends. And at first they were trading care bank points. Basically, it's all online. It's not like there's any tokens or paper to manage, thank goodness, at first. But then as they got to be better and better friends, they just forgot about the care bank and went off on their merry way. And that is actually a really wonderful outcome of this, but it also doesn't make it so easy to write your next grant because the numbers aren't completely reliable about the number of trades that the care bank has encouraged. Now, another similar currency is found in Bali, the Balinese Narayan Banjar system. And this system has been in place for millennia, since time immemorial. And it's basically like a time bank. The time bank is used largely for community celebrations and ceremonies like funerals and weddings and other sorts of community work that has to go on to make the community really nice. And there's this iconic story that Bernard tells about, or told, sadly, he also passed, about a rich man in Bali who had the hotels there, and he hadn't had time for years to go and attend to his responsibilities in his banjar. And when he died, nobody came to his funeral. So it was a very important thing, and it wasn't something you could replace with money. Can you imagine Bill Gates dying and having nobody come to his funeral? I mean, really, it's fascinating. Now, another currency that Bernard worked to develop with Brazil was called the saber, I think. And this was a very interesting one. I'm not sure it is completely operational today. I can't say, but in this system, Brazil was just about to introduce a new tax on cell phones, and it was back when cell phones were new. And they were really worried about the deleterious effect that it would have on young people in the country. So they wanted to dedicate the profits or the taxes on this to education. Great, thank you, Brazil. So what they did was they implemented this currency where young people earned credit by tutoring their slightly younger peers. And so they'd get time credits, or these saber credits, for those tutoring. And when they were done with their high school education, they could exchange those credits for funds to go to college. Now, in addition to helping distribute college funds to people who need it the most, it actually helped the learning going on, because it's widely known that if you're teaching other people something, that's 90%, you remember 90% of what you learned. If you're just being lectured at, like unfortunately I'm doing right now, you're only going to retain 5% of this. So, it was a win-win-win. all the way around. Another currency I helped Bernard develop was in Ghent, Belgium. It was called the toricas. And the toricas were used in a neighborhood that had accepted a lot of immigrants, and the immigrants were having a hard time assimilating. And one of the particular things they needed was land to cultivate community gardens. And so if they participated in cleanup activities or green up activities around the city, they could exchange the pay that they got, these toricas, for lots of different things, including community gardens. And just after Bernard died, I went back and visited Ghent to see how it was doing. And I discovered a cafe that you could go to and use your toricas to buy food and drinks, food store. And in the back of this food store was a clothing store. So these toricas were not just being used for community gardens, they were being used to meet real needs. And there was a lot of social rewards. These places I visited were really social places. A lot was going on. It really made for a community development project. There are also ecosystem rewards because the community gardens were kept up, but they also have these little greening projects around the city. And these were things that you could earn toricas for, was putting all these little flowers in, for example, or planting some pretty trees. Now, commercial purpose currencies, moving away from social purpose currencies, they're mostly to develop businesses. Loyalty, business loyalty, liquidity, advertising, and labor are some of the things that commercial purpose currencies are used for. Now, one particular kind of commercial purpose currency, there are more in circulation than dollars, and I'm sure that some of you in this room have used them. Can anybody tell me what that might be?
Frequent flyer miles.
Bingo. Thanks, Lucille. Right. Frequent flyer miles, total complementary currency. Commercial barter systems are systems that are established where businesses trade credits back and forth instead of real dollars. And the first one and most famous one is the Veer system in Switzerland. This is some, again, a little bit older figures about the value of the Veer, but it was started back when we had the first depression in the 1930s, and the Swiss banks had pulled back their credit lines, just like banks are known to do when depression hits. And the businesses all got together and said, the only reason I need the bank line of credit is because I have to pay you for the materials I'm getting from you to make my beautiful sweaters before I sell them to the customers. This gap between production and sales is a big place where complementary currencies can help a lot. So they just started trading debits and credits with each other, denominated in Swiss francs. So all of the Veer Bank transactions happen in Swiss francs. And it's become an incredibly successful system. It's a lot of the reason the Swiss economy is as stable as it is. It's not because of the watches or the chocolates. It's because of the Veer. So frequent flyer miles are a really good example of loyalty currencies. I've been encouraging towns to combine these loyalty systems so that all the businesses in the community benefit from consumer loyalty. So instead of just having those coffee cards that you get the punch holes in and you get a free cup of coffee at the end, that's a loyalty currency. You could do that with all the local stores and have them, again, keeping the money local and keeping the purchasing power local. I developed a food currency for Vermont back during the crash after 2008. I don't believe this is still in existence, but it was an electronic payment gateway that combined, food storage currency, food credits, which was a little more like a time bank. And we were trying to drive more food in storage because, of course, Vermont is a not very wealthy state, depends unbelievable amount, given how much agriculture we have there, on imported food from elsewhere. And what we saw in 2011 with Irene, which was a big hurricane that hit us, is that is a very tenuous dependency. If you're depending on our mass transportation system to get you all of your food, it's about 95% in Vermont, you have a weak link in your sustainability chain. Another currency that Bernard developed in cooperation with Sacramento was a carbon currency. And in this currency, businesses and individuals who do things that help reduce carbon. So let's say you bike to work, or you insulate your home, or something. You'll get these carbon credits in carbon currency, and then you can trade those carbon credits in the cooperating businesses, which tend to be the businesses that also are issuing or using carbon. So if you use your carbon currency credits to get your bike tuned up at the bike shop, that would be one example of that. And then the businesses can purchase from each other using the currency and redeem it either by retiring it. That's done when you sell your carbon credits to one of the big environmental NGOs that are buying them up to retire them, or trading them on the local offset markets, which of course doesn't do any real good to reduce carbon, but that's a whole nother subject. I wrote a paper on it last semester. I'd be happy to send it to you. They're another scam by the neoliberals to get us to not reduce global emissions. So what I'm arguing for, and this is implied, I think, in my emphasis on the monoculture aspect of currency, is that we really need an ecosystem of currencies. Having simply one kind of currency that serves all our purposes is one of the big problems, especially when that one kind of currency is based in the banking business model. So what would this look like? You might have anti-poverty time banks, food currency for local farmers. There's health currencies that Bernard and I worked on developing, elder care services, education and personal development currency, carbon reduction, environmental enhancement currency. And the thing about having an ecosystem of them instead of one kind is that if something goes wrong in the banking system or the business system, the rest of the economy and our human lives would continue on without lots of impoverishment. So this was the first little booklet I wrote with Bernard. It's all of these books and workbooks are available for free on my website. This one, interestingly enough, it's just a little thing, 20 pages long, but it does give you a step-by-step guide for how to make a complementary currency in your community. This little book has been translated into 13 different languages and used all over the world, which it's probably my most popular book, and it wasn't the longest one by a lot. So that's the end of my prepared talks. I don't know whether I've lasted the amount of time Stephen gave me, but I'd love to have a discussion with you about it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think, how do I do that again? Let's see, stop. How do I do it? End of slideshow. Okay, thank you. Somebody helps me.
Excellent, Gwen. Thank you so much. I had noticed a wooden currency post 2008 by some little town had started issuing.
Right. Yep. Yep. Those wooden nickels. Oh, there's my book. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen.
Well, as moderator, I'll continue after Howard started the discussion. Super interesting, Gwen. Brings back lots of memories, and you named Greco and other people who were at that conference back then. And I guess maybe two comments I'll make, and then I'll pass to the queue. One is just to share. I did, recently, actually, my son went to a statewide magnet school in Illinois. It was a public school, but it drew its students from across the state. And Illinois had a financial collapse under a Republican governor who kind of refused to sign a budget. And so all the public school universities, especially, who really depend on public funds, didn't get their funds. They didn't get any budget that year. And this statewide magnet school was the only public school that was funded through the Higher Ed Act in the state. And so it too did not get its funds, but unlike the universities, they depended like 80% from the state for their funds. So it was a huge problem. So there's a little committee, and I joined it, and I came up with a proposal for a statewide local currency. And the state I live in is Illinois. The abbreviation for Illinois is IL. And the best part of my proposal, one is it was 2 pages, which all of you in the room who know me know that's very hard for me to write or to limit my words that much. But also the name of the currency, it was ILEARNS. And depending where you put the hyphen, if it's after the I, it's I learn, I learns. And if you put it after the L, it's Illinois earns.
Nice.
So it's super cool.
There was another one I didn't mention that was a lot like that, actually, in California, the registered warrants, right?
My fellow committee members, especially those from the school themselves, and the idea it was going to be piloted, it would be backed by public education. So it would be unlike, as far as I know, the Ithaca dollars, people bought them with US dollars, and you
earned them. You earned them.
Okay.
You earned them. They were earned into existence. So you didn't have to buy them. No.
That's
they weren't
good to know. Because mine were going to be spent into circulation through public education and start with the smallest rural districts or counties that have one school district and pilot them there. And the statewide magnet schools would have done the research about how to do it. It was a super great proposal. And then it would be gradually built up statewide. And the school district was spent into circulation for an increase in pay to the employees up 2% or whatever. They don't have to take it, but they can take it. And local businesses agree to receive it. And in the long run, which is only a year later, it's receivable for partial pay of your property taxes, which are at the county level. So it was circular, and it would all be on a smart card. So you could follow how it increased the local economy. Super great idea. They didn't buy into it, or they didn't even give me the time of day hardly. And, went with actually attracting students from international countries. And, the same time, Sally Mae, for student debt, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, it was privatized. And part of why they privatized that in the 90s was to go after international student debt, that's another story. But anyhow, the point I wanted to make also was that, I wrote about in the one book that I co-edited, it's on the neoliberal agenda and the student debt crisis in the US higher ed. In my 2 chapters in it back, are the bookends for this problem in monetary critique and monetary reform. And in the monetary reform chapter, I talk about local sort of there are 4 levels: micro, meso, macro, and mundo. So micro, that's all economists focus on, is how individuals act. But the local currencies are really the meso level, and national currencies and the international exchange of national currencies are the macro. And the mundo is the planetary environment, what Kate Raworth talks about. Anyhow, Margaret Kennedy had just published this book about then. Wonderful book, like the saber in Brazil is talked about in here. It's creating an economy where everybody wins. Great book, except for one fault. It's missing the 1 to 2 to 3 paragraphs on the macro level problem. Kennedy focused on local currencies, complementary currencies, like you just gave a great presentation. And she said in the email exchange after, I just said, that's the only shortcoming. She said, "You're absolutely right, Lucille. You write that book and I'll write the intro." I never wrote the book. She died within a month or 2 of cancer. And I want to write the new paper on the role of cancer in giving blood and money reform, because those are connected matters. So I think the point is, and I think you made this point, maybe not in your presentation today, but your one at May Day, that it's a both end.
Yeah.
We need the macro level work, and maybe you want to speak to that, and then we'll go to John's question. Is it a both end, the complementary currencies and the macro reform, that the need for them is stimulated by And yet, also, I would say the macro level form does not preclude, in my view at least, the need or the place for complementary currencies for those areas that have been so damaged, by what they're inheriting. And because complementary currencies, they serve that local community in a way, and they then enable people to save their macro level money, national money, for expenses that, are outside there. And anyhow, I'll be quiet now and let you respond to the relationship between the micro macro for complementary currencies.
Absolutely. I mean, Bernard was interesting because he didn't want to go after the big money systems. He really just wanted to work on these complementary currencies because he saw the problem with the monoculture. And he also saw the power of the banks to shut people down. He used to say, Gwen, you don't want to be a dragon slayer. Don't go after the big system. Just work on these nice little alternatives. And I, of course, wanted to be the dragon slayer. So we argued about that a lot. But in the end, I saw him just a few months before he died. And I was like, Bernard, I'm convinced that even though I know you don't think it's a good idea to recreate another big centralized system in the government that just replaces the big centralized system in the banks, I really think we need publicly issued money. And he agreed with me. He said, yes, we have to have publicly issued money. And he thinks it should be a dual system. So the public money wouldn't just try and replace the kind of unitary system we have now, but it would be another form of currency that would come into existence that would run alongside some of the private money and crowd it out over time, right? That was how he saw that working. And I can see that point too, but I'm completely on board with public money. I think it's got to be democratically run. It's got to be publicly owned. The benefit has to go to the public. And it also could be public and have more than one type of currency. Because having one type of currency in all the local economies, in all the sectors of the economy, is a little bit like having a soccer player breathe with the same lungs as their entire audience. It just doesn't work. Monoculture money doesn't work. And it's bad for us, just like all monocultures. In fact, he worked with some scientists to come up with this very interesting resiliency theory that showed how this emphasis on efficiency that we have with one kind of money leads us to the kind of crash and burn economics that we have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Go ahead, John Howell.
Hi, John.
Hi, Gwen. Thanks so much for your presentation. A couple of thoughts. One thought along the line of what Lucille was asking you about. But we talk about local currencies, and of course, there's some interest in Washington is to prevent local currencies like cryptocurrencies, which is our new form of local currency.
Yes and no. I don't. The cryptocurrencies are not complementary currencies. They are merely payment vehicles for the national currency. Those you buy with dollars. Those you have to have a bank account to get cryptocurrencies, and they can trade back and forth with dollars. But yes, I mean, people think they are, but they're not really. So anyway.
Well, that's a good distinction. Thanks for making that distinction, because it's easy to think of them as just another currency like complementary currencies. And what you're saying is there's the fundamental difference is whether you have to have essentially a bank account to use them. And
with time banks, you can't trade time dollars for money.
Right.
With the food currency, the food currency was a little different. It was more of a hybrid, but in VIR, even though it's denominated in money, you're not actually using Swiss francs. So
right, it's just using that as a measure of value. It's not using it to trade. Yeah. We think about this in the communities in which we live, and it's really easy to see from a historical perspective that when the national currency is simply not working, then you need something else, and that's where local currencies have been born in many circumstances. And we who work with try to do this dragon slaying, to get a national currency that's actually a democratized money, think, well, once we get that currency going, there should be very little need for these local currencies because this national currency will serve the function. That's very idealistic, and government bureaucracies are not known to work perfectly in any case. So the idea of having alternatives or supplementary, and that sort of means the same thing, supplementary or it sounds like it certainly ought to be there available for use when it's needed. But if I'd like to be able to find a handle on the argument that says, look, it's needed right now because look at the interest you're paying on this system that the banks are running. But it's a hard case to make when people's normal circumstances, they find, the U.S. dollar is working for them, so no big deal. So it's hard to generate interest in this kind of thing. And
I do think in times of economic, prosperity, it's really hard to introduce them. That's why I think combining the nationalization of money with let's nationalize it, but let's make multiple forms. It doesn't have to be an unlimited number. I mean, I think people think local currencies and they go tilt because all of a sudden we're going to have hundreds of thousands of different ones. Not necessarily. Time, food, carbon, data, creativity, and art. You could have in business currencies, you could have 4 or 5 that would cover the gambit and would be functional in their individual systems. Much like, we don't all have just blood running through our body systems. We have electric energy running through our nervous systems. We have blood in the body. We have other water, all sorts of different flows in our biological systems that help keep our biological systems healthy. If all of a sudden, bam, they all turn to electricity, we'd fry, right?
Yeah, well, you speak of these different categories for these things that you've just spoken of. But when you think of local currencies, you think of a local currency in terms of geographically local. Then you think of all these other things. And my question is, I've heard the argument made, well, local currencies then can join together and so
federated. Yeah, they actually do that with time banking in Wisconsin, where they've federated and you can exchange your local time for something in another town far away because they were able to combine them. And we were working on federating with Edgar at the national level for a long time. It's not that hard. So if you have a time currency in your town, time bank, and you want to go to Washington and stay with somebody, they'll have a time bank and you can trade back and forth your time between the two places. It's not that hard. It's really more what the currency is used for than it is the locality, in my view, of how we could initiate having complementary currencies at a larger than local level.
That's an interesting view. I hadn't thought of it in that way. So that's helpful.
Like in Ithaca, those Ithaca hours and the fiat currencies, those are a lot like just purely local currencies meant to circulate in the local economy that aren't going to be good anywhere else. Fine. But those are not the best kind to introduce. They're really hard to manage, and they have the same problem as the dollar fiat currency. You have to manage them for inflation. You got to worry about the notes. You got to worry about counterfeiting, all that stuff. You don't need any of that. What we really need to think about is what type of exchange is best in what category of the economy, and match economic flows with currency flows that can keep it going, even if the banks aren't working so well, especially if the banks aren't working so well. Let's get it to a point where the banks aren't working so well.
Right. Yeah. So we heard Will Ruddick last year at the AMI, and you're undoubtedly aware of his work with local currencies there in Kenya and elsewhere. Is that right?
I've heard of him. I don't know a lot about it.
You don't know about that because he apparently has developed a good deal of technology for basically the information exchange by which you can keep track of these mutual credits and so on. And a system like that, it's available through cell phones, and a lot of people have cell phones that even are pretty poor. And so the system manages to work in that way. but having that technology available for people to use elsewhere and to say, well, you can have this, and here's a technology ready to plug in, seems to me as another important, would be an important contribution.
Well, yes. I mean, 20 years ago, before we had cell phones and before we had multiple types of cryptocurrency, this idea of an ecology of currencies just seemed way too difficult. It's not so difficult anymore now that everybody has cell phones, because cell phones can work. There's a currency in France, an arts currency in France that runs off people's cell phones. So you can produce artwork and get credit for it, and then you can use that currency to go to museums or shows or something else, so. And it's all run right off the same Siklos. Siklos was one of the first programs to come out to manage this stuff. That's how I developed the food currency, was on Siklos. And I can tell you from having developed it that it's really like having your own little banking system on your computer. You can do a lot with it. Stephanie Rearick, who was supposed to be in Chicago, has developed a similar system to what you're talking about in Africa, in Wisconsin, where a number of different types of currencies can circulate on the same platform. And it keeps track of mutual aid, and it keeps track of time banking, and it keeps track of commercial barter, all right there on the same system. So we have the technology. It is not hard to develop more than one type of money.
Thanks very much.
Go ahead, Nick.
Hi, Gwen. Great presentation. I'm kind of blown away by the depth that you went into the local currencies. It was really great. What I found, and I'm wondering if you found the same thing, was that in the basic three times that we had a publicly created money system in the country, the continental currency, which colonial script, which started with the colonial script, started in Massachusetts in 1690, and then all of the other colonies followed suit eventually. And it was a back and forth with England on swatting them down, and then they'd issue some more, and that was a history. And the same thing with the colonial script to fight the revolution. We couldn't have fought the revolution without creating a colonial script. And the same thing with the greenbacks. We couldn't have fought the Civil War. So they came into being because of the absolute necessity. And I think that our movement has to appeal to people that there is a necessity that we have that type of a system now. And I think that's our challenge.
Well, if we're going to change the monetary system, we might as well change it right. Right?
Go along with that.
I mean, I actually don't have a lot of faith in this Congress and this legislation going anywhere. It's fully and wholly owned by the corporate elite. Let's face facts. And I have personal experience where I got into a lot of trouble fighting the banks on several occasions. So if you want to know what the banks will do to you when, you're questioning or pushing for public banking, even, it's not pretty. Bernard was right. It's hard. And so I also think that some of these complementary systems are essential for helping people change their mindset. I really like Bruce's presentation about how it's our culture, it's our mindset that is the problem. And we have to change that to change the economy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Just before we move to Sue.
Have you ever checked out the psychological consequences of money? I suggest.
I write a lot about that in my book. Yeah. Especially scarce money and scarce money that only values things that are scarce. One of Edgar's books is called No More Throwaway People. The scarce money that causes the impoverishment really impoverishes human souls and causes a lot of suffering. And it's funny, I've always hated money. And so it's sort of ironic that, I found myself in this path of working on monetary reform.
Well, I found that paper by Kathleen Voss as very interesting because there are psychological effects just having the presence of money. They did a test where they had two classrooms and where they were just giving some ambiguous test, you know, a little quiz, silly questions. And they on one room they had a big dollar bill up on the wall, photo of it. The other room they had a big photo of a cow shell, just a
couch?
seashell, a seashell.
A seashell. Oh.
And yeah, and then they just watched them taking the test. And in the room with the big dollar bill on the wall, people sat separated from one another, their head down, trying to answer those questions. And when they were asked for help, they weren't very helpful. They didn't want to be bothered. In the other room, the people had moved their desk into a circle and were laughing about the test and filling it out together. So that, I thought, was a very powerful psychological impact on people, that this debt money, you know, it encourages alienation and criminal behavior.
Because it's artificially scarce. It doesn't need to be scarce. You know,
Yeah, right. And it's
the nice thing
artificially
about
scarce.
complementary currencies is that they're sufficient. You know, if
Yeah.
you go negative in a time bank, it doesn't matter. You're not being charged interest. You just, you know, you might need to go into the office and help them stuff envelopes for a few hours, and then you'll get back out of the hole. But it isn't a problem in mutual credit systems to be negative.
Yeah, it's not money that'll mess with your mind.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
there were two people who had hands up. I want to move to them. I just want to say, Gwen, that I'm a little more hopeful what you said about fighting the banks. Yeah, true. But I don't know if you heard Richard Robbins talk, but if
I caught
not,
the tail end of it. Yeah, I
yeah,
tried to.
the idea of a debt walkout, a well-organized debt walkout that is putting the pressure for getting the change at the macro level. There's some hope there. So, but let's move, Sue. Go ahead, Sue. Sorry to make you wait.
That's okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, so Gwendolyn, thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity to ask two questions that are related. Recently, the last couple of years, I've become involved in my local government activism. So in terms, and I don't know anything about local currencies particularly. So with the history of these local currencies, what percentage of them were issued by local officials, you know, government in quotes? And that's one question. And the other is, what percentage of them were possibly fought by local officials?
I have no idea. I mean, in terms of percentages, I have no idea the percentage. I know that there were a lot of local governments that were issuing them during the Depression, but I think you could start to figure that out by looking at every state in that website I mentioned to see, but I really have no idea. I know that
I'm not asking for specific percentage. I'm just asking for your impression.
Oh, and you mean now or through history though?
Through history.
No idea. I have no idea, really.
I don't have the percentage either, Sue, but I do, and I haven't looked at this in a long time, but Louis Solomon, who was also on the advisory board, as was Jane Jacobs of E.F. Schumacher Society when they did the local currencies in the 21st century. But he's a lawyer at Georgetown University, I think. He wrote a book called Rethinking Our Centralized Monetary System, the Case for a System of Local Currencies. And as I recall, he says in there, they are legal, but units of government cannot create them. It has to be a not-for-profit organization. And so in current law, I think that because, you know, only the government can create money.
But even that current law is based on an executive order that was done during the Depression. It's not really a constitutional issue unless you're trying to issue, having a local government issuing dollars themselves, like the legal tender. There's no real serious prohibition. I was a local planning director when I started the time bank, and we accepted time banking dollars as payment as different things that could happen in local government, like the pool, for example, or other things. And we allowed people to get paid in those time banks for their volunteer service on boards. But yes, there is that executive order that was issued during the Depression that was going to try to stop these local governments from issuing their own script. So
That's
people are people are afraid to do it for that reason, but it doesn't mean you can't.
An executive order is not a law, so I will look back at this. That's a really important point because, yeah. And I wanted to say something else, but I can't think of it, so we'll move on.
Well, it's true that nowadays the answer to Susan's question would be it's like those fiat currencies you saw, those were largely nonprofit organizations that weren't operating through a local government. Right. I don't know of any current examples of local governments that are issuing scripts. The examples I know of were during the Depression. I do know that the state of I should have included this one in the talk because I mentioned when Lucille was talking, the state of California back during the financial crisis after 2008 did issue what they called registered warrants, which were a little bit like the colonial script, in fact, because they just wrote these notes that wrote these checks, actually, that looked like something you deposit in a bank, and you could bring them in to get paid in 3 months. So that made them kind of like securities. They were actually like mini bonds. And people started trading them on eBay because, some of these big contractors would get them and they could maybe wait 3 months to cash them in. But, a local guy who was trying to put food on the table couldn't. So they started being traded on eBay and the SEC shut them all down. But, that same government, the same treasurer, actually years later, invited me out there to speak in California because they were trying to set up a public bank to deal with their cannabis industry, multi-billion-dollar cannabis industry that didn't have banks. So the state treasurer was literally having to send armored cars to the cannabis owners to collect their taxes. And what I suggested they do, we have a little song about this I could play if you want, is develop a public cryptocurrency and accept it for taxes in much the same way as those registered warrants worked back then. Instead of trying to go the public bank route, because it seemed to me like combining a public bank, which the banks hate, with cannabis, which the feds hate, was just going to be so, but a cryptocurrency, on the other hand, would be great. So anyway, you accept for taxes, and it was developed by a public entity instead of being the private kind of cryptocurrency that we have right now.
The irony is that it's taxable income, these complementary currencies.
No, not all of them. Time banks are not taxable. Barter is taxable, commercial barter is taxable, but yeah, if you're trading normal things in the cannabis cryptocurrency, that would be taxable for sure.
Go ahead, Sam.
Sure, yeah. This might be a little bit of the same answer to the last question. So if there's nothing new there, just say so. Something and first of all, just thank you so much. Holy cow. I learned a ton from your talk. And I also have been, I'm feeling really grateful for your career and all of the wisdom that you've accumulated through that. And again, thank you to the AMI team, the program this year. The speakers have been incredible, and I'm really grateful for you gathering us. The thing that I've seen over and over again with complementary currencies, local currencies, and in particular currencies created to meet shortages and so on, is that eventually the banks or the government that's operating the national currency realizes that it's successful, realizes that it's growing, realizes that, and they shut it down, in various ways. And so for me, I feel hopeless about this strategy to some extent, because when it really works, when it starts to really work, when it's not working, when it's like a little thing that's just there on the side, it's eking along, maybe it'll pop up for a minute during a recession, but in general, it's going to go away again. That they don't care about that. They let that go. But if it really starts doing well, it seems to me that there's a pretty strong history of them shutting it down. And it reminded me of a lawyer who said that, what makes bank money creation a privilege is not actually a privilege, it's the exclusion. of everybody else.
Monopoly.
Yeah, and if you go and you read the actual Federal Reserve Act where that exclusion happens, it's the most insane paragraph. But it is difficult to read, but actually that's the only place where the banks receive the legal privilege to create money is in a statement about everyone else not getting the privilege. And so I'm curious to just know, like, what do we do about this? Like, and I'm thinking at the national level, because this is, this is where, and this is all over the globe, right? Do you have any thoughts about how to tackle that?
Well, I'm afraid my thoughts are not going to cheer you up. So brace yourself because you're absolutely right. I was shut down. I was fired from my job. I had to go to court. I mean, I was shut down just for advocating for a public bank, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to advocate for as a town, right? But the mayor of the town was a lobbyist for the bank that was going to lose the money, and he made sure I was fired. It was tough. So my picture of how this happens is unfortunately a grim one. It is that this system crashes all the time. We're in line for another crash in 2026 because that's when the long real estate cycle comes to an end. And that's when we have to have our ducks lined up and get ready to get in there and set up something new, because that's really the only time you see change happening in the monetary sphere is when there's a disaster. And I mean, that's where the initial legislation came from Chicago for the Chicago plan, was during the Depression, right? When they were struggling to find alternatives. And yet the banks were still powerful enough to stop it from happening. So I'm afraid that's not good news. But I do think that by working steadily and hopefully on it, and getting people to understand that there are alternatives and having them model the alternatives through the small local systems that aren't going to attract a lot of negative attention, I do think that helps when the crisis comes.
Thank you. I think in the session with Richard Robbins, another idea was about lawsuit possibility, suing the constitutionality of our money system.
Well, that's what Comer did up in Canada. They were talking about that earlier today.
But it takes a lot of time and money to do that. And so I rather have a debt walkout first, but
a debt walkout, I like that. I like the idea of coordinated activities that would be targeted at the same thing. The problem is with the debt. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind with the debt walkout, and I'm sorry, I picked it up a little later in his talk. I had some things I had to do earlier today. People who are on the poorest rung of the ladder, first of all, would be targeted and punished for doing that, likely.
Let's not go there now and use your time, because it's a small percentage of people that do it very strategically and publicly, but I think we should take the questions. So I jumped to Oscar just because I don't believe you've spoken yet. So go ahead, Oscar, and then we'll go to Pinchbeck.
Thank you very much, Gwen, by your great presentation. I want to say something about the case of Argentina. It's a country I know very well, and there in Argentina, crises frequently now. There is one, and about 2003, the crisis and the money, scarce money, caused the emergency of many barter clubs, and about perhaps 1 million people entered that club.
I just didn't understand the last word, a club?
Barter clubs, and they issue a bond, money called the creditos, including to be used among the clubs, not just in one club, but they changed the creditors between two or more clubs. That that experience has been forgot, and today we are in another crisis, and that experience appears to be forgotten. And but I wish to ask a question. Do you know the word of Eloisa Primavera?
Of course, Eloisa. Yes, you'll have to say hello to her.
There in Argentina and Switzerland and many places, and there they work with a money called money par. The name is par, P-A-R. And another information is that in this very moment, a province in Argentina is issuing provincial money.
Nice.
All the Chaco, and the province is La Rioja. And because the government today is the case, as yesterday informed us Clara Matei, is a kind of fascist and a cruel government that via inflation is frying the money from the society, and there is a reaction in this government in La Rioja to issue a provincial money called the Chacho, C-H-A-C-H-O. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And be sure to say hello to Eloisa for me. She's wonderful. She's a force of nature.
Stephen, do we have a time for a few more questions? Oh, I can't hear you, Stephen.
Sorry. We're fine. We're not in a rush. There's no rush.
Okay.
We're on
last
our
one,
own
right?
time.
Okay.
Hi, Peshwa.
I just want to confirm what she said, and actually, the gentleman from Argentina. I was shut down for 2 years for actually defending my PhD, which was counter-cyclical effect of complementary currency with the proof of data in Chemgua, Germany, and I was shut down for 2 years. And what I found is that when you have a complementary currency, what will happen is actually people will switch to the other currency, as the case of the Argentina in 2003, for the case of the Credito. They open up and actually they set up a barter clubs in plazas, places, that so people can change the barter, but with a unit of account, which was Credito. So the point is here that my thesis throughout the last 7 years have been that, okay, the silver currency, I would call it silver money. Silver currency, it's a complementary currency, or the complementary of the main money, which is a gold, which the banker confiscated and changed it with what they call it credit. So silver throughout the ages has been the labor money, okay, because it's connected to time. So the silver currency is the time currency, or time money, which is a labor money. In Irving Fisher equation, actually, what happens is that when you were in the first part of the MV, overflow of the economic activity it goes to the second currency, which that's why throughout history we have had gold and silver. Silver always was the overflow of the surplus value of the goods and services. So, and for the confirming of that, we have a gentleman, Capella, and he has extensive knowledge on dollars of Middle Ages, dollars with the plural. What does it mean? It means that the silver standard has never been a standard. So it has been totally local. So it's like a totally complementary currency based on a local. So that's why the silver money, silver currency in Greece will work different than Germany because the productivity of the labor is different in Greece than Germany. So that's why the whole success of the bankers throughout last 500 years has been to remove the silver currency, which is the labor currency, and confiscate it, pre-purchase it in form of the credit and return it back to us with the interest and the fractional reserve. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, like I started the whole presentation saying, what is the definition of a complementary currency? Well, it is only right now defined by the fact that it's not legal tender, but we've seen that legal tender is kind of a flexible concept too. So there's no requirement that a complementary currency not be legal tender. I think the difference between like a time bank and the silver is that silver would have been accepted for taxes when it was in circulation. So it would have been considered legal tender, which makes, sort of takes it a little bit out of what we think of as the complementary currency world. But I think you're right, absolutely, in terms of having these two precious metals, one of which was much more common and easier to get than the gold. And so it did work to support regular people. Sure. Is that what you were saying? Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, exactly. But just one point. The taxes, the existence of taxes is because of the interest. So because when they issue the money, the currency, they don't issue the interest. So how they can compensate with the interest? It's a taxes. So taxes is not related to the labor or the silver, but we were forced to pay with the labor and silver.
Got it. Thank you.
Interesting point. Yeah, that makes sense. Stephen, thank you very much. How do you pronounce your name?
Peshwak,
My
right?
name is Peshwak.
Peshwak?
Peshwak, yeah.
Thank you very much for very interesting input there.
Peshwak presented 2 years ago on co-colonialism, dealing with Iran, and it was a very interesting conversation. Thank you, Peshwak.
One just thing I thought of, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of your presentation and all the script money and my local school district, I wrote that in the chat, had script money back in the 30s. But I believe that executor order, I bet that was in relation to Black Friday, because I think it was that's why the government closed the banks, was the threat of all these different script monies, more and more of them forming. And either Solomon says that, or maybe it's in Irving Fisher's book. I don't know, but
I'll have to look it up. I don't know off the top.
Irving Fisher got the idea from the Silvio Gesell. Okay,
Right.
so he tried to implement it in the US, but because the 1929 problem was because the contraction of the money from the circulation by the bankers. Okay, so their purpose was to monopolize and consolidate more banking system. So adding the Irving Fisher idea was against the agenda. So that's why they shut it down.
Mm.
It was FDR. I'm sure it was FDR who issued the executive order. I think it was a little later than Black Friday, though. I think it was after they had already, gotten fairly successful, but I'll have to look that up.
right.
Sebastian Edwards talks about that too some.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too, in terms of the Peshwak talked about dual currencies there, and you have too. And Hudson talks about in early Mesopotamia, the local currency was barley seeds. That would come out at the threshing floor. And it was a time when all debts were resolved because the farmers brought in their goods. And there was a international trading currency between Mesopotamia and other areas, which was silver. And so you had a dual system there of where it was good to have a complement or double currencies. And I notice in China, they have that. I think the purposes are different in that I'm sure in China and as many places around, there's other local currencies or the needs for them, as you pointed out well. In your experience, and thank you very much for sharing your hands-on experience. We haven't gotten so much hands-on experience of sharing on local currencies as this. So it's much appreciated. I also wanted to know, you mentioned No Throwaway People, and it was by Edgar. What was the last name there?
Edgar Kahn, Cahn. He's the father of time banking.
Thank you. And
he used to write speeches for RFK back in the day. He was part of the war on poverty in the Lyndon Johnson administration. He's a famous lawyer, but it was when he got sick. He had a heart problem and he ended up in the hospital and was feeling helpless and valueless that he was inspired to create time banking. And he's just an amazing man. I recommend looking him up.
I just want to mention something relative to what Lucille brought up with that debt default day that we might have sometime in the future. The suffering that you went through, Gwen, with the banks, where we may write out a whereas Gwen suffered this, people suffer. We know a number, 3 or 4 central bankers. And the one banker that Saturday morning, he had to be anonymously. We don't know who he is. He was anonymous, and he's a top banker in the world. We are just lucky to have him with us. Also, I was a part of there's a Chicago Teachers Union. They changed over to a more radical, a stronger group of leaders because times are really getting tough with so there was a group called CORE. It was the Caucus on Organized something, but it became the key group. And CORE, we worked on banking, studying the banking problem. And we came up with things like we had to close 50 schools, and we figured out we should jail the bankers and not our students into these small classrooms. And what the bankers did is they used, and this was documented by the Tribune, a Republican newspaper, what they used was auction rate bonds. And they used ALEC, who, a legal firm who could put the laws in place in Illinois that gave huge interest rate benefits to the banks if there wasn't enough bankers participating, even though they were able to create the money for it. They didn't want to create that much money for it, especially if they didn't create it, they would get the highest interest rates. So if they're bidding at 2% and 4% and 5%, the last bid would either win. And if there wasn't enough, it was going to be 9% interest. It was outrageous. And then with interest rate swaps, but just the Tribune figured out with just those 2 areas, they took $50 million in the Chicago Board of Ed took $50 million in losses. And they ended up closing 50 schools in 2013. So it was a dramatic time, but that was, casino gambling and corporate abuse. It was like playing with the bankers. And the people on LaSalle Street here said it was like a child playing against a professional baseball player, trying to go up to them in their own games to play their games, and they were gonna get pounced upon, and they did. And It happened in Galveston, Texas, and Mobile, Alabama. Both those cities sued, but we didn't sue, and we didn't get anything out of it. But those two cities sued and got something back. They didn't have to suffer totally. But I think when we go on debt strike, I think we got to come up with our list of things that the banks have done wrong in the past and really outlined the system. Anyhow, I'll be quiet. And this is the last day, last hour. So the time is ours, so to speak. But we don't want to take you up too much time. But
Right. And we have a music song, I think, to send us off. So don't forget.
Yes. Yes, Gwen and Howard, we're counting on you people. And it may be a video too.
What did you play earlier? So
Oh,
I know
I did the very first one on the video set with the bull and the
the end of capitalism.
yeah, it was perfect for the group we had, so it really worked out well, and thank you.
I would like to have Gwen close us with the music, not me. Thank you.
Okay, it's Gwen's turn.
Okay.
John has his hand up. So and John and John, two Johns.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a comment in the chat that I noticed that reminded me of something that, historically, when there have been multiple systems like gold and silver and so on, often then there's been a currency exchange and arbitrage done, and people make money out of these kind of exchanges. It's exactly what happens when we have international currency differences. There's all this kind of betting that goes on in terms of arbitrage because of currency exchanges. And I'm thinking that's always an argument to have a uniform currency, just like, of course, the argument for uniform currency is easy. It facilitates trade, everywhere. Obviously, local currencies are, as Sam Hummel says, are kind of a little in the corner here and not threatening anybody. Maybe they're at a small enough scale so that it doesn't become an issue. But it is interesting that issue was raised. A question was raised in the chat about whether or not having these multiple currencies doesn't sort of invite this kind of currency exchange arbitrage, and if that would ever be a problem to worry ourselves about.
Well, I think it would only be a problem if everything went back to dollars, if everything went back to the national currency, like cryptocurrency does, like Berkshire's do, like the pounds and the Brixton pounds. All of those are exchangeable for the national currency. So they're not truly complementary. But you don't have arbitrage with time banks. You don't have arbitrage with commercial barter systems. They're systems that are sufficient instead of scarce don't invite fraud. That's the other very interesting thing about them, that a lot of the corruption and fraud and crime that we experience in our human society is the direct result of having a scarce currency, a scarce and ultra efficient currency. I mean, the scientific work I mentioned that Bernard did with some other biologists and scientists showed definitively that too much efficiency, and it's efficiency you're after if you're talking about one size fits all, $1 pays for all, right? Because I can walk into a cafe in Kazakhstan and buy a coffee with a US dollar. That's as efficient as you can get, the other side of the world. But the examples they use to illustrate this, I think, are helpful. You have alligators that feed on the turtles, for example, and they don't feed on anything else. If the turtles get sick, the alligators all die too. Too much efficiency, not enough diversity in what keeps you going is a big problem. Monoculture is a problem. When we have monoculture crops and one pest, it completely destroys the entire crop. That's a problem. Resiliency demands diversity, not an unlimited amount of chaotic diversity, but some diversity. So 2, 3, 4 different currencies that circulate in different sectors of the economy would be much smarter than one size fits all.
Right. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And John, the other John Conway.
Yeah, a moment ago we spoke about, unfortunately getting fired for your beliefs and speaking out. So sorry that happened to you. There is a precaution most people can take. You still might get fired, but you got a fighting chance if you do a couple things. Just a point of information, I think Michael Kumoff had to do this at the World Bank or whatever, wherever he was, is say that, any of these ideas I express are my own opinions and not those of my employer. And then you have to tell who the employer is. I'm not speaking as a teacher or whatever. It's unfortunate, but you need to do that when you speak or send an email or commit something to writing. That's pretty powerful when they try to let you go based on those ideas. I know they might find other reasons and trump up something, but for anybody that's worried about speaking out, that's working. That's something that you can do as a precaution.
Yeah, I did all that.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I mean, I was doing this on vacation. They basically fired me for doing something I was doing on vacation as a private citizen on my own time. I wasn't doing it as part of my city responsibilities ever.
But you have to commit that to writing, and you have to say that before you speak also.
I would do that.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened.
No,
That's terrible.
that isn't necessarily a protection, just put it that way.
Okay.
But good idea. Just if you're fighting the banks, it's not necessarily going to work. They'll get you for something else.
The banks, though, I think I don't think it's that easier. And I think I can't prove it happened to me in academia, but I could tell a story that, why I didn't the last level of promotion. So I had a secure job, and I had gotten tenure, associate professor, but I had at the colleague level, somebody who didn't understand and didn't appreciate, my bringing this issue into the field where it belonged. And, I don't want to go into the story, but a silver lining, because here I am doing this work full time as opposed to, a second more than full-time job if I had stayed in academia a little bit longer. So I don't regret it, but I think there are, it's contents that people are threatened by, and, including family and brothers and good friends who, feel like it threats them. So they put blinders on, and they, if it's at the colleague level, they can ding you, they can undermine your promotion and, or, stop your publications from getting published. And so it's a little more complicated than just saying these are my own thoughts. In academia, that's already the case. So anyhow, Stephen?
Right.
Yeah, I just want to say about Lucille on that point with education. I've had 3 of Lucille's students, and I work with new teachers in the Chicago school system. And I've had 3 of Lucille's students, and they all loved her dearly because she was very caring and very concerned about individuals. So they were very appreciative. All 3 of them in Franz's neighbor. Oh no, 2 in Franz's neighborhood of Pilsen, and 1 up on the north side. But anyhow, I wanted to say one other thing too. Oh, in terms of full disclosure, when I work, I get to talk occasionally and meet with people, like going up to Madison. I got to talk with Quakers about thinking about monetary things and monetary systems a bit. One of the rules I have in designing a national system is aiming towards full employment. How would you, if that becomes a key value? And if you have full employment, all of a sudden, you would think there might not be a need for a complementary currency. On the other hand, it so happens, what was I doing as an educator? I was teaching freshwater biology. And I knew a fair amount about communities and resiliency and everything you said. And so if it's in the design that there's a multiple currency or a national and other little currencies, I just wanted to say I have no objection to it.
Or two
I'm
national
not-
ones.
What?
Two national ones, you know?
Yeah,
for
yeah, it
different-
could be that. It might be barley and silver. It could be what, yeah. So anyhow, I just wanted to say that, but I'm very open-minded, and after today, I'm even a little more open-minded. So thank you.
Mission accomplished. So-
One more, Sam, and then maybe we'll turn it
Yeah.
back around.
Yeah, quick question.
Oh,
I'm sure you're familiar with modern monetary theory. And yeah, sorry, say it.
We're honest about it. They call it a theory.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I have my critiques of it as well. One of their things that they really are into is the state theory money, chartalism, and so on. And they're not wrong. Obviously, there are, countries and currencies that are operated that way. But it certainly seems like there are many more ways to arrange the value of a currency or create value or demand for a currency and so on. And I'm just wondering, like, if you were debating someone from the MMT world and they were saying, no, all money works this way, you have to have a tax demand, etc. Kind of how would you approach that challenge of trying to reframe the situation?
Well, there's some good examples from history about what they have in mind. So like you say, they're not entirely wrong, but they completely ignore the role of the banks in our system. It's like, what banks? I think the bankers fund their movement because, man, those MMTers have grown by like Topsy. I see them, they know who I am. And I don't really take them on very often because I think what they're talking about is partly what we're shooting for, right? Where we want to have publicly issued money that comes out of circulation by taxation and et cetera. So it's just not a fight I care to fight. But the Channel Islands is a good example in history of that form of money, which are these little islands off of Britain. They're sort of in the English Channel, and because they're islands, they're able to do things a little differently than they do at home. And they had that kind of money system where they would spend money into existence to build public infrastructure and then tax it back out of existence. And of course, the tally stick example from older Britain was how that money circulated. They'd issued it into existence for public services and public infrastructure, and then this other half a stick would come back and matched up with its original and be retired. I think it's notable that Parliament burned down when they decided to burn the tally sticks in the basement, right? That's one of the more symbolic things that has happened in our monetary history system, I think. But anyway, I think they ignore the role of the banks. I think the banks pay them to ignore it. That's like what I think about modern monetary theory.
Yeah.
I like Radhika Desai's comment on MMT where she said there is a lot that is true and a lot that is new in MMT, but that which is true is not new, and that which is new is not true.
There you go. That's a good one. Sort of like the bankers, the balance, right? Everything on the left is wrong and everything on the right is gone.
Well, I'm going to say thank you very, very much, Gwen, and everybody who's asked great questions. Super, super inspiring and energizing way to end this 20th anniversary or 20th annual conference of AMI. And really, really good work, Gwen. So thank you, and stay with us and stay healthy.
You want to hear California cannabis cryptocurrency?
I want to hear the song.
Okay, that's the song. All right. So I have to share my screen again. Yeah, I will. Yeah. There we go. Can you see it now?
Yes, we see.
Is that better?
I dreamed a way to make weed pay, making a living a new fun way. I know what you're gonna say. Cannabis currency, California cannabis cryptocurrency, California cannabis cryptocurrency. Never thought we'd ever see California cannabis cryptocurrency. cryptocurrency. Never thought we'd ever see California cannabis cryptocurrency. The banks fought back, I'm sad to say. No public bank in California. Then we thought of an easier way. Cryptocurrency. California cannabis cryptocurrency. California cannabis cryptocurrency. Never thought we'd ever see California cannabis cryptocurrency.
Maybe we have one more too, possibly.
Oh, sure. I love, did you already played the end of capitalism though, right?
Right. Yes.
All right. So, the
Well,
other,
maybe a different group in part, but
oh, is it? You want to hear that one again?
you pick. If there's another one, go for it.
Oh, well, there is this one. It's just a little bit about money, but it's also about the revolution. So let's talk about the revolution. Let's see. I pick it here. Is the sound still sharing? Is this good?
Grow your food,
Grow your food,
plant more trees,
plant more trees,
bike to work,
bike to work, keep some bees,
start a time bank,
join a land trust,
turn your compost, ride the bus. Be the train,
be the change, be a solution, regeneration, revolution,
raise a child,
raise a child,
get a vision,
live simple lives, learn ancient wisdom, reparations for colonization, stop racial discrimination,
be the change,
be a solution, regeneration, revolution,
people power,
open space, community is our saving grace, local action, state demands, healthy soil access to lands,
be the change,
be a solution, regeneration, revolution,
game changers,
fire keepers, monkey wrenchers, faith leapers, come together, unified, we must change or we will die,
be the change,
be a solution, regeneration, revolution, be the change, be a solution, regeneration, revolution.
Yeah, that one I heard that one. That was great. That one's I
There's-
like that
I can
one.
play one other one if you want was actually banned from Facebook. and it might be related to money. It just occurred to me there's a monetary verse in this one too, if you want to hear that one more, but it's up to you.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
go for it.
Yeah,
One
we
more.
love band videos.
This one, did we play this for you? We might have played this for you before, but this is Better Day is Coming. Did you see this before?
Think it will.
A better day is coming.
Did you optimize it?
Did I? Oh, you can't hear it?
Not so well.
Not so well, yeah.
I'm sorry. I've got to go back to
Have
this.
to go back to.
Yeah, it still says it's optimized for sound. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Hmm.
Maybe it needs to pull. This is what I played at the AFJM annual meeting, right? I think, right?
Go for it.
This I know, a better day is coming. I can see it coming. A better day is
We're wearing our
coming.
AFJM
Oh, yeah.
t-shirts.
This I know, diversity's our power. Seize the day, it's the hour. We must unite to fight for all our rights. Get out and vote for Harris, she's the best to represent us. A better day is coming, oh yeah. This I know, a better day is coming. A better day is coming. A better day is coming, oh yeah. This I know, a better day is coming. agriculture's able to grow food for our table. A better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know. A better day is coming, a better day is coming, a better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know. A better day is coming, I can hear it coming.
This is the money
A
burst.
better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know.
Yeah.
Money comes in blockchains with public banks we all gain. We're taking down the old
Here we are.
bars of power. Time banks and business barter, debt will soon be a non-starter. A better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know. A better day is coming, a better day is coming, a better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know. A better day is coming, I can feel it coming. A better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know. Talking solar power, it's cheaper by the hour. Renewables are winning the race. Somewhere wind is blowing, somewhere water's flowing. A better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know. A better day is coming, a better day is coming, a better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know. A better day is coming, we all can help it coming.
still singing
A
along.
better day is coming, oh yeah, this I know, this I know, this I know.
Earlier, there was a picture that was taken at May Day. You and I may have been in it. I don't know. It went by too fast for me to pick it up. So, I mean,
Hi, Susie.
Stay with the people a little bit extra.
We're hearing you all, John. Anyhow, Stephen,
Yeah.
thank you, Gwen, for that. And